Welcome to our listeners. Welcome to our next episode of our Dream to Rise. And we have a special guest who's been who's in UK, no? And she is known as to be the zoo. What's this? The zookeeper.
Singing Zookeeper.
The zookeeper, no? And
Singing Zookeeper.
The Singing Zookeeper.
Okay.
And she's a transformative guide helping individuals overcome past traumas and silence their inner critic to lead genuinely happy lives. So she will share with us her own battle with chronic depression rooted in childhood trauma, and she pursued various therapies but found true healing by embracing self-compassion and love. And Lou works with people from all around the globe, both individually and group, working for both private and corporate clients, making an impact on others' lives. And without further ado, I just want to listen to her story. And I'm sure you all want to listen to her story. Let us welcome Lou Henwood. Lou,
Hi.
welcome.
Thanks, Cynthia. Thank you. I'm not going to drop into Filipino talk right now.
Yes, I did mention about the Philippines because I want you to mention that.
I will.
So, okay, let us start. Lou, if you could share your story, that's usually my objective, to share our stories to the world. And what brought you to where you are right now, based from the journey you've experienced?
So, when I was born, I was given away by my mother, my biological mother. And all of our childhood experiences impact on how we develop as an adult. Mm-hmm. So I've always had this feeling of being unwanted, unloved, not needed, separate to requirements. Nobody needed me as such. Don't get me wrong, my adopted parents were fabulous, but this is sort of an ingrained belief that I'm, cast, throwawayable, disposable. Mm-hmm. And then during my very young childhood, I had 2 major operations before the age of 5. And that was really quite traumatizing. In those days, anesthetics weren't particularly good. So when I came around from the very first anesthetic, it was an incredibly violent experience because I reacted badly to the anesthetic and I was tied to the bed so that I wasn't fitting and jumping about. And my mother and my mother's sister was holding me down. And I remember that very clearly. So that was traumatizing. I was around about 2, maybe 3 years of age at that point. And then I had the second operation. I don't remember that being as traumatic, but my assumption is it was, but I've just totally blanked it from my mind. And then when I was just around about the age of 6, I was taken away from my best friend. We lived next door to each other, and he was my light, he was my soul, he was my, other half as such. I was absolutely, we were inseparable from each other. But my mom and dad moved house, so I had to move as well. Obviously, I was only 6. So at the age of 6, I dropped into a really deep depression. But in those days, we're talking about the 1960s, they didn't really understand depression in children. They didn't really understand what was going on with me. And my mom and dad didn't really understand what was going on with me. And I certainly didn't. I was only 6. Meh. I just knew that I felt incredibly miserable and very, very bleak. At one point, doctors were trying to put me on Valium, which my dad was wise enough to say, no, I'm not putting my 6-year-old daughter on Valium. And during that time, I used a technique, which I now realize is a valid technique, was breath work. I used to use breath work just to get myself out of this state of bleakness I was feeling. I used to just do this really heavy, deep breathing, and I would just go into almost an altered state of mind. And I've recently started studying breath work, and actually it's a very valid technique. But that's how I coped. But during that time, I get the violins out, because I went to a convent school. I was educated by nuns in a convent school, and it was an academic school, high fee paying school. So my parents were paying a lot of money for me to go to this school. I was dyslexic and in no way at all academic. So I failed miserably all of the time. And I'm a very intelligent, I was very bright, very intelligent child, but my reading wasn't brilliant because it was interrupted by these 2 operations I had. My attention wasn't there. So I was constantly in trouble. So by the time I left school, I came out of school with a whole heap of shame, absolute shame. The amount of times I was warned that I would go to hell. You know, you're a bad girl, you're going to go to hell, you'll never get to heaven. All of that type of shame that they used to dump on me. Not all of the nuns were bad, I will say that, but a lot of them were very naive and would use that type of behavior towards me. So I came out of school feeling that I wasn't any better than a slug, you know, walking along the ground. I was really not worth anything. And I had this desperate need to belong as well, and I didn't belong anywhere. So I was pretty damn miserable. And this isn't for people to go, oh, I feel really sorry for her. Don't. I did. I could do all that by myself. And I did feel sorry for myself. And as I was growing up, I go from job to job to job to job, because every job I went into, I felt miserable. I felt unhappy. I felt bleak. And of course, being unaware, having no self-awareness at all, it was always the company's fault or the manager's fault or the company owner's fault or the product's fault, whatever it was. It was never my fault. It was always somebody else's fault. Then I was very lucky. I'll reframe that. I'll say it in a slightly different way. I got married to a quite a narcissistic husband who would gaslight me all of the time. And because I didn't have any self-worth or any self-confidence, I believed what he said. So he bought into my idea of me being depressed and fueled my idea about me being mentally ill. I wasn't mentally ill. I was just blue and not coping very well. But he fueled that. Now, the beauty of that experience was I had my daughter. And I realized when my daughter was very little, she would be maybe 18 months. I'm sitting there looking at her thinking, I'm teaching this child how to become me. I can't live like this anymore. Can't live like this anymore. So she gave me this fuel to get out. She didn't tell me she's only 18 months, but to get out, to start to live so I could teach her how to grow. And my ex-husband, this is where the gift came in, told me, you can't leave me until you get help. So implying that I was totally and utterly messed up in the head, you get help. And I did. Absolute beaut. Because my therapist turned around and said, do you really think it's all your fault? Do you really think that you are in the frame of mind that you're in because of X, Y, and Z? Do you think you could step out of it? And I worked with this beautiful coach, a therapist rather than a coach, a transactional analysis therapist, very spiritual man as well. And he started to hold a mirror up to me and started to show me where my gifts were, where my qualities were, because I didn't believe I had any, none, zero. And he was a wonderful man. Anyway, I did split up with my ex-husband. And
so
I
you
went
got divorced with your
husband? Yeah.
Oh.
But, yeah. Best thing I ever did.
Oh, really? Because isn't it when he suggested for you to see a therapist? Isn't it? It was his idea. So, but then you did what he asked you to do, but you still divorced him.
Oh yes, yeah. Because what I could see was what was happening was the fact that I was being gaslighted at home.
It still continued. It still
Yeah.
Oh,
so I was constantly being told I was wrong. I was constantly being told by him that I wasn't good enough, etc. But the therapist was showing me, actually, that's not true. Let's look at this. So he empowered me. And then when I did split up with my ex-husband, but don't get me wrong, we're on speaking terms now, it's fine. But when I did split up, I had to stand on my own 2 feet. I had to grow. I had to start to find my own inner strength, and I did. And boy, have I got strength? And I didn't realize I had it. I was such a victim all the way up to this point. I was such a victim, and carried on with, finding different jobs, and it wasn't working. It was always somebody else's fault and so on. I'm still pretty unaware of how I operated. And then through a really strong push when my daughter went off to university, I had always wanted to live abroad. Always wanted to live abroad, never done it. So when she went to university, I asked if she would be all right if I left the country. Yeah, no problems, Mom. She was quite an independent young lady. So I left, went to the other side of the world, and ended up in the Philippines.
Yay! Wow. By the way, why did you choose the Philippines?
Oh, that's another long story. I made an investment in the Philippines and it went really badly wrong. We were ripped off. The European investors in a hotel complex were really badly ripped off. But out of every piece of adversity, you know this, I don't need to teach you this, out of every adversity comes a jewel somewhere.
Yes.
Because what happened was I ended up meeting Helen, and I ended up meeting Trudy. These are the two ladies who live in Manila now. They became really good friends of mine. I fell in love with the country, just fell in love with the country. But of course, I was seeing it through a tourist eyes, because I would go for 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks, then come back to the UK and go back to work. So when I went to the Philippines to live for the first time, Helen had given me a job. It was a real culture shock, because I went in there with the eyes of a privileged Western woman and just expected the whole place to operate in the way that I wanted it to operate in. And a lot of expats over there have the same sort of attitude as well. And I was with the expats, and we were sort of, oh, well, they should be doing things this way and they should be doing things that way, and how ridiculous, being really critical and really sniffy. And at some point, the penny dropped. It was like, actually, no. Let the world operate in the way that the world operates. Me telling everybody else that they're wrong is making me miserable. They're not taking any notice. So just for instance, a tricycle. A tricycle is a form of public transport for your listeners, by the way, you know this. But a tricycle, it's like a motorbike with a sidecar, and it takes about 8 to 12 passengers. I would expect one to stop if I put my hand out, and it didn't. It would always slow down, and I'd get really infuriated that this thing didn't stop, so I could get on it. And I didn't have the wherewithal to actually observe everybody else who watched the thing slow down, would trot up behind it, hop on it. Oh no, I'd got to have it my way, the way I wanted it. It had got to stop for me, because I had that attitude. And this is really exaggerating how a lot of us operate, is the fact that we expect the world outside of us to operate in the way that we want it to operate, and it doesn't. So the Philippines gave me a beautiful gift, because as soon as I realized that actually, if I just let that go and stop trying to control everybody and everything that I saw, the feeling of freedom that I had, it was beautiful. It was gorgeous. I got very sort of say la vie, okay, whatever, yeah, fine. During my time there, I had one boss was the barangay captain, and then another person I knew was an artist who was working on the museum that I was working on. And both of them just kept telling me, Lou, let it go. Let it go. And I didn't understand that. Had got no idea. And then what was happening when I was working was that the people who were working for me would tell me something had been done, because they were too flipping scared to tell me that it hadn't been done, because I was so controlling. So controlling. So they'd say, yes, ma'am, it's done. Yes, ma'am, it's all been done. Yes, ma'am. And I'd get to the museum and find it hadn't been done, and would lose my top. Now that actually, I didn't lose my top with anybody in particular. I just lose the plot. Mm-hmm. But actually, again, that was freeing, because in the Western culture, we are not allowed to be bad-tempered. We're not allowed to lose our temper. We're not allowed to be angry. It's frowned upon. But over there, I could lose my head just get really enraged, and they just turn around and go, mad white woman, mad white. And I loved it because my label was the mad white woman, and it was beautiful because I could be me. I could be. Nobody got angry with me about getting angry, only me. I got angry with me about getting angry, but nobody else was critical of me being angry. It was just, oh, she's the mad white woman, don't worry about it. And that's how I was treated. It was beautiful. And then the other thing that I noticed all the way through my growing up, I never belonged. I never fitted in anywhere. And of course, going out to the Philippines, am I going to fit in there? No, not at all. Firstly, I'm probably 6 inches taller than the next person. Secondly, I got white skin, and at that point I got white hair as well. So I stood out like a lighthouse. And the Filipinos, as you know, don't hold back in being friendly. Hi, Mom. Yeah. How are you doing? How is your day? Where's your husband? Have you eaten? So I was just like a Belisha beacon. So there was no way I could belong. So very quickly, I let go of this idea that I was going to fit in, because I would never fit in there. And again, it was beautiful because it gave me permission to be exactly who I wanted to be. So the gifts I got from actually leaving my culture and going and living in another culture was amazing. Now I'm rambling on, and I'll tell you the reason I was there. If you want me to slow down a bit, to let me know.
Yes, please go ahead.
But I was asked very shortly after I got there if I would project manage the building of a museum. Now, you got to bear in mind, I came out of school with no qualifications. I had got no command of the Filipino language. I got no command of Tagalog or Malayalam, which was spoken in that area. I didn't know anything about museums. I didn't know anything about tourism. I didn't know anything about the culture. I didn't know anything about rice farming. So theoretically, I shouldn't have been able to open that museum. If I'd have put all of my attention on all the stuff I couldn't do, all of the shame I got from my childhood, all of the messages I got about not being good enough, not being clever enough, not being smart enough, not being able to speak the language, knowing nothing about the industry and so on, if I'd have put my attention there, the thing wouldn't have got built, because I'd have just felt so bad about myself. But, and this is what I teach my clients, get into the why. The barangay of Motag, the museum's called Motag Living Museum, and it still exists, and it is still getting 5-star reviews. I've got to do a bit of bragging because I'm still so proud of my Motag family.
What's the name of the museum again?
Motag Living Museum.
Motag,
M-O-T-A-G.
Motag.
Yeah, Motag Living Museum.
Okay.
And my reason for opening that was that the villagers in Nabaoy and Motag and the local barangays around that area, the barangays for your listeners are villages in that area, didn't have any form of or no ability to get jobs. Jobs were not available. Unless you had owned your own shop, you might be able to get a job in a shop. But it was all rice farming. That was about it. Elders had got no chance of getting any work. And youngsters who came out of school with very few qualifications, again, wouldn't get any chance of getting in work. So the income, the area was so poor. It was desperately, desperately poor. And it was poverty in a way that I would never have had an idea of how poverty works. But these people were happy. They were beautifully happy. They were content with what they had. But I wanted to give them an opportunity to bring more money into the area, and also to show the tourists how Filipinos live. True Filipinos, not the people on the party island, because it was very close to Boracay, so that was a party island, but the people of Malay, the people of Aklan, how they actually lived and worked. So that was my passion. That was my passion. I wanted to bring tourists off the holiday island onto the mainland, so that firstly they could see how the Filipinos actually lived, because there's no written history there. So we only went back to the 1930s. I got all my information from the elders. There's no history. There's no research I could do apart from talking to the elders. And the tourists could actually experience. So they would go in and they would pick rice, and they would plant rice, and they would ride the carabao.
The tourist, they will
Oh,
have the opportunity to
yeah.
experience. Oh, that's
Oh,
nice.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
They would thresh rice. They got the thresh rice. They'd make pinny pig.
Maybe.
They'd watch the elders do weaving. So they weave baskets, or they weave solidap, or they weave nipa. So they physically got involved with everything, and it just hit me up when I did all this. I was just excited about it all, and I thought everybody needs this experience.
Yes.
So I wasn't interested in the fact that I got no qualifications, no museum experience, no tourism experience, didn't know the language, wasn't interested. I was excited and really passionate about bringing tourists in to experience the Filipino way of life and to bring money and opportunity into that particular area. Because every tourist that went to Boracay would have to go through Malay, would have to go through Caticlan, which was 2 miles up the road. So every tourist had an opportunity to go to this place. And it was that passion that drove me. So what I learned was, regardless of, and I'm going to be universal here, our background, no, regardless of how we're brought up, no matter how many negative messages we have, how many negative messages are instilled in us, how many adverse situations we overcame as children, that does not have to dictate our lives. That is not who we are. That's the stuff that needs to be shed. It's almost like a tortoise shell. We need to get the tortoise shell off so that we can stand in our own power, because we're each and every one of us unique, absolutely unique, with our own special gifts. And people get hooked on this idea, oh, I'm special. Nobody's special, but we are, each of us, and every single one of us, unique. Every single one of us has a gift to bring, but we need to shed our old stuff, our old beliefs around ourselves, to step into our magnificence. And we're all amazing.
Exactly. When you mentioned about special, but I always tell others, because they always belittle themselves, no? And I always tell them, you have a special gift. You are that's why I consider you a special person, wherein you have that light which you can share to other people. So that's my way of sharing what how the person is I considered as special, because of their special gift that they need to use. They don't usually, they're always talk in terms of, oh, the fear, doubts, and worries. How will I be able to use those gifts, because I have limited resources, because I don't have the confidence. I'm scared what other people would say. But you have those gifts. Just try to remove all those cobwebs and dust, so that you'll have a clearer picture of what your purpose is. Once you have a clear picture of your purpose, it's so easy to go through the journey, even though that you face challenges. And those challenges, you may also consider them as blessings, because it makes you the person you are right now.
There's always a gift. In every challenge, there is always a jewel. In every trigger, you know, when somebody else triggers you and maybe you get angry or whatever the response is, there's always a gift in there somewhere, if we can step back long enough to look at it. So the way I work with clients to get them to release their past trauma. And I do this very, very gently through a combination of obviously just discussing what's going on, where their blocks are, what they feel their blocks are. And then I take them through a type of hypnotherapy where we very gently go in and find the history of what created the block in the first place. And then I, through, again, hypnotherapy and trance, will encourage that part of them to release. Because if you can imagine, I'm going to draw some pictures here in your head. So if you can imagine, you've got little Johnny, who's 2 years of age. As a child, if we have adversity happening to us, we can't make sense of it as an adult would. So we put all sorts of meanings on stuff that isn't necessarily true. But as a child, we think it's true, but we take those beliefs into our adult life. So if you've got a little Johnny who's 2 and he's learned how to turn the radio up and his favorite piece of music comes on and he's like, oh, and he's absolutely in his element and he's, oh, just loving life, dancing and joyful. Oh, mom comes in, will you sit down and shut up? Johnny is hurt, immediately hurt. Now, as a child, we see our caregivers or our parents as perfect because we don't have any reference on the outside world to tell us that they're not. So when mom comes in angry, it can't be mom that's at fault. It's got to be, in Johnny's mind, Johnny. So what's caused mom anger? He can't rationalize that mom's got a deadline. She needs him to be quiet so she can get her deadline done. So he works out the fact that he was having joyful time, having an absolute brilliant time, dancing and really getting into being himself. That's wrong. Snip that bit off. I'm going to snip that off. But that part of him doesn't go away. It still exists. So it sort of lands in almost like in orbit around each of us. We've all got these, and looks out for the same stimulus that caused that pain in the first place. And it would be very painful to get knocked out of his reverie. So when he goes to the school disco and a piece of music comes on and he's like, yeah, I'm going to get up and dance, because the instinct's there, because he's still that same boy. This little part of him is going to go,
no, yes.
No, the girls will beat you up, the boys will laugh at you, your blazers. So my job is to teach my clients to calm this little part of them down and to actually get them to stand down. They don't have to be on duty anymore, to relax and allow Johnny to become Johnny. But it doesn't have to be anything that dramatic. I was listening to Gabor Mate. He was doing a conference about addiction. So the majority of the people in the audience were addicted in some form or other. And he said, in 5 questions, I will find out why your addiction came about. And he said, I want one person in the audience to put up their hand if they've had a happy childhood. Nobody, as you can well imagine. You've got a whole audience of people who are addicted in some form or other. And then one lady trepidly sort of put her hand up, and he started to question her. And within 5 questions, he found out that her mum and dad adored each other. She turned around to him and said, I had a happy childhood. Everything in the household was really happy. But what he found out was that mum and dad adored each other so much. So they were cuddling, they were kissing, they were looking into each other's eyes. Beautiful, loving couple. She felt surplus to requirements as a little one. So it doesn't have to be traumatic. It doesn't have to be something really, really excruciating. It can just be a misinterpretation from a child by what she's seeing. So she's seeing mom and dad in these gorgeous, loving clinches, and she's going, oh, I'm not part of that. Oh, but it's not true. But that's her interpretation. And then we take these types of messages into our adult lives and they play around in the subconscious. They constantly run the show, but they're not conscious. We can't see them. So my job, get these up into consciousness, go, oh, okay, hello, little Johnny, right, you can calm down now. So we put you down there and let big Johnny get up and dance. So that's my job. And it's very gentle. It's very sweet. It's very loving.
Oh, lovely, lovely. And how have you helped survivors using all the tools which you have just shared?
Okay, so I work with people either in a one-to-one situation. So I would work through what it was, and I don't take people back into their trauma. Okay, that's one thing I work very vehemently towards, because if you have a trauma that you talk about and you relive it and you talk about it and you relive it, all you're doing is re-traumatizing yourself. And you're also increasing your neuro pathways around that trauma. And the brain will always take the easiest route because the brain is quite lazy. So if the widest neuro pathway is the one around that trauma, then your attention is going to go to that all of the time. So you're constantly in that space. So my job is to teach people how to step out of the trauma and wipe away the neuro pathways. It doesn't negate it, it's happened, but it stops you living in it. So just very simply, I had a lady who struggles with fibromyalgia, and she has to use crutches, and these crutches come up to about here. They've got braces on the arms and handles here, so she's got 2 of these things. When I first met her, she was mortified, she was embarrassed. She'd had a really, again, very, very traumatic childhood, and she was mortified. She didn't want to go out, she didn't want to be seen by the public because she was embarrassed. She was really, really embarrassed. Now, after spending I think it was about 3 sessions with her, firstly I got her giggling, got her laughing around the use of crutches, and secondly, the trauma that she had, the guilt that she had around certain situations, I got her to let go. She now goes wild swimming. She goes swimming for an hour and a half each day in water that's about 10 degrees. I couldn't even think of it. But again, couldn't have thought of it because in her head, she was an invalid. She couldn't walk properly. She was ashamed of how she looked. She was ashamed of how she moved. Now she's there in a wetsuit diving into lochs in Scotland. That's one example. I've got many, many examples, but that's one.
That's great. And what keeps you, how do you remain in power and continue what you do? Because
I think the main thing for me, and to be perfectly honest, I'm having to learn this, if this makes sense, because I'm, as you can probably tell, I'm quite strong, quite powerful and quite driven. And as a consequence, I quite often neglect me, forget me. So I'm learning, because I've been ill recently, and the reason I got ill was because I'd forgotten to look after myself, that I have to self-care. So for me, I use the idea of the 5 bowls, which is a Buddhist method. So you have 5 bowls, and these 5 bowls, you can have more than 5 bowls, but I tend to do 5 because it's easier, it's more manageable. What is it that you need in your life? So you fill up each of these bowls. So for me, the first thing I need is nature. So if anybody who's seen me on TikTok, there is no TikToks inside. They're all outside, me walking. I've got to be in nature every single day. Even if it's only for 15 minutes, I've got to be outside. The second one is, for me, I've got to dance and I've got to sing. I don't necessarily have to dance or sing with anybody, but I have to tap into something that I love, which is dancing and singing. So that's the second bowl. These are my needs. The third one is to be in community with people, because it's very easy doing the job that I do, because I work predominantly on Zoom. So I'm speaking to people in a 2D setup. So I might have somebody in Australia or somebody in America, great, but I don't have anybody here. I don't physically have anybody here. So to be in community, because we're primal, we are animals. Fundamentally, we're animals, we're mammals, and we are gregarious. We, you know, if you look at caveman times, we were in groups, we were in packs. We need, firstly, the chemical exchange of being with people. We need the emotional exchange of being with people, and the feedback, the biofeedback that we get being in people. So that's my third one, would be in community. My fourth one is checking out my habits, making sure that I don't stay in a 2D setup all day. It's very easy to stay on your computer, look at your phone, watch the TV. That's incredibly bad for your neurology, because you're only looking at stuff in 2D. So to make sure that I'm doing something physically in 3D, so I might sew, I might do crochet, I might paint. Do you know what I mean? So it's something physically in this world rather than me staring at a screen. So that's my fourth one. And then the fifth one,
that shows your interest, also your passion. So that's what you're telling it in 3D, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other one is to make sure that I'm eating properly, that I am not overdosing on caffeine, that I'm making sure my fluids are up. So I'm, physically maintaining myself. And one of those self-care things is a bath. I love to get in the bath. It's one of my favorite things, just to give myself permission to float off in the bath for an hour and do nothing. And we all need that. We all need space.
Exactly. And you know what? That's the first thing that I always tell my clients as well, to health and well-being. Make sure that you take care of yourself, because once you take care of yourself, your energy changes. It becomes the negative energy changes to positive, and you are able to transmit that positive energy to other people. So your relationship improves as well.
Yep,
and when it
absolutely.
improves, your performance improves. And when
Yep.
your performance improves, then you view life in a different way, full of joy, full of meaning.
If you're giving from an empty cup,
Uh-huh.
then you're not giving anything of quality. So
Uh-huh.
you need to fill your own cup
Yes.
first. One of my teachers is a guy called Jamie Cato, who used to sing with Faithless. And he teaches, he's a transformational coach as well. He teaches, and he tells people to think about it being very British. So you've got a teacup and a saucer. And you feed people from the saucer, and you constantly keep your own cup full, and everybody gets the stuff from the saucer. It's all good quality, but the teacup needs to be full.
Yes.
And it is so important for physical well-being as well as mental well-being, to make sure that everything starts here. The air hostesses say this, don't they? You put on your own oxygen mask first.
Yes.
Before you give it to anybody else. And
Yes.
it really should be a rule of thumb. But again, we are trained, particularly as women, and I don't want to be sexist, but particularly as women, to look after everybody else.
Exactly. And that's how we were raised.
Yep.
Be of service. Look, and you're always the last. Before feeding, or before taking care of others, or take care of them first before you take care of yourself. But I believe it should be the other way.
I agree with you totally. And there's nothing selfish in it.
Yes.
There's nothing selfish in it, because a mom who is tired doesn't have enough to give to the child. So the child is more likely to get snapped at or ignored or pushed away. A mom who is replenished and has got energy and attention to give to the child.
Yeah.
So it's never ever selfish to look after yourself first.
Exactly. Wow, great session we have. So what's your main goal for the next 12 months?
The next 12 months, I am going to be running some corporate workshops, which I'm excited about. And that's teaching business leaders how to get teams to pull together without egos getting in the way. Because the issue that you have in workplace is, posturing and putting other people down and building each other, I'm better than you, that sort of attitude. So that I'm teaching business leaders to get cohesive teams, cohesive and vulnerable teams, so they can work together. Continuing with my one-to-one work, which is done through Zoom like this. And I'm also going to be running retreats, which I do every year. So I run retreats, and that's all around taming the inner critic. And we have a blast. We have an act, because healing ourselves doesn't have to be serious. It can be fun. We play. So we do, for instance, a dating game where you have to write down all the stuff that your inner critic says to you. And then you have to sit opposite somebody and say, I find you ever so attractive, and I'd love to take you out on a date. But before we go out on a date, this is what I'm like. And you read out all of the stuff that your inner critic says. And eventually the penny drops about how ridiculous the stuff that your inner critic says to you. So we play around with games like that. I do an innocence game. We had an innocence game a few months ago, where one lady who was really buttoned up, really buttoned up, and we did this innocence game. And part of the game is you have to go and sit outside, if the weather allows, because we are in the UK, and just look at everything, but you're not allowed to put labels on it. You can't look at a wall and say, oh, there's a wall, or there's some grass. You have to look at it through the eyes of a child that's never seen it before.
Oh.
And that takes some skill. So she did this work, and there was a little girl that was walking along a beam towards her. And the penny dropped. She said, my mother would never have allowed me to do that. She came back into the workroom in tears. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she said, I just had the most beautiful gift. She said, because my mother would never have allowed me to walk along a beam like that little girl. And she said, when the little girl, this happened in real time, when the little girl had gone and followed off her mom, she said, I got up and walked along the beam. This lady was about 62 or 63. It's the first time she'd been able to be playful. So my retreats are very playful. And I run online workshops from time to time, and courses, online courses, which are hybrid. So a mixture of being in a group with me leading, and then you do some, pre-recorded lessons as well. So the one that's going at the moment is consciously creating confidence. So it's bringing all your stuff, all your negative stuff into consciousness, so you can put it aside and just move into the life that you want to live.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. So again, before we end, what simple advice would you like to share to our listeners?
Be kind to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Don't beat yourself up. Accept what comes your way, because that's what's happened, rather than being unkind to yourself. And self-care, nurture.
Mm-hmm. Very good, very beautiful. Would you like to share your how they could contact you if they need to reach out?
Okay. So my email is thesinginzookeeper@gmail.com, but I'm also contactable on my website, and that is thesinginzookeeper.com. Very easy. And on the front of that, you will see there's a book here button. So if you wanted to have a consultation where I will very, very quickly run through some of the blocks that you've got, because I can see very quickly into how people are operating. And then if you want to go ahead and do one of the courses or do one-to-one sessions with me, it can be decided at that point. So it's easy. And look out for me on TikTok and on Instagram and Facebook.
Yes. So in your Facebook, it's Singing Zookeeper.
Yeah.
And then plus the TikTok, the same account name.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also you have LinkedIn?
I don't use LinkedIn that much, actually, but I do have LinkedIn. I ought to start revving that up. But yes, so that's on what you were asking me. What am I going to do over the next year? Build up my LinkedIn account. There we go.
Okay. Thank you so much, Lou, for your time. And oh my, what a great mission you have, that you're impacting other people. And thank you for the museum that you have started in the Philippines, and you're helping my fellow brothers there in the Philippines. Thank you so much.
Salamat!
Salamat! Maraming salamat. Okay.
So, absolute joy.
Yeah, same here. Same here. It was nice connecting with you, and I've learned, and we have learned so much from you. Okay, to our listeners, till our next episode, thank you so much. Bye.